nobody is, was, or will ever be entitled to having known that specific information about Kit Connor unless he himself decided to release that information. Hello lovely humans, welcome to this space on the internet. So, recently, Kit Connor, who plays Nick Nelson in Heartstopper, you should go watch it, I also made a video about it, has been a bit of a hot topic lately. I mean, I'm late getting to it because I was doing other stuff, but it's been a big thing in the queer media world, I think. There was a controversy that arose after Kit Connor was pressured to come out despite not wanting to. This video will not be about Kit Connor specifically or about the specifics of that whole thing, but I will be using certain details from this case and from that of another in order to illustrate my point and ideas surrounding the topic of queerbaiting, and in order to address the ongoing argument as to whether a person, especially an actor or influencer, can queerbait. So, what is queerbaiting? Queerbaiting is a marketing strategy in which media reels in queer and queer-allied audiences by strongly suggesting the presence of queer characters or storylines in a production, usually without compromising the appeal this production will have to other viewers, including queerphobic ones, and without delivering on the hinted queer representation. So, for example, if a movie trailer were to depict two same-gendered characters that were very, physically intimate, and media surrounding this movie pre-release very much suggested that perhaps these two characters were romantically or sexually involved and thus queer, but then when the actual movie comes out after all of these viewers have gotten excited about the prospect of queer characters, there aren't any queer characters and these characters are not written as a couple. That would be an example of queerbaiting. A very simplified, very drastic example, but that's the simplest way I can think to illustrate it in practice. This means that the people making this movie have reeled in a new audience, that being LGBTQIA plus folk and allies, without compromising their other viewer base in queerphobic, homophobic, transphobic viewers. They've not actually put themselves on the line to write a queer character. So why are we talking about queerbaiting? Queerbaiting, more recently, has been adopted as a term in order to describe especially celebrities who seem to someone queer but aren't explicitly coming out or releasing that information to the public, which of course is not queerbaiting in and of itself. Kit Connor, for example, was pressured to come out as bisexual after he was seen with a girl, presumably in order to prove that he was not exploiting a queer storyline by playing a bisexual character in the Heartstopper. This was him being accused of queerbaiting. The problem with this accusation is that nobody is owed an explanation of anyone else's sexuality. Nobody is, was, or will ever be entitled to having known that specific information about Kit Connor unless he himself decided to release that information on his own terms. And I'll admit that I personally tend to be frustrated when queer characters, especially in movies and television, are not portrayed by queer actors, and I think this applies to most if not all minorities, such as, for example, the disabled community. It's just wrong, inaccurate, harmful, and actively taking opportunities from disabled actors to cast abled actors in disabled roles. Similarly, though to not the same extent, I think that casting non-queer actors in queer roles takes the opportunity away from queer people to portray their own experiences, and I believe that queer people, and those of all other minorities, should be given the opportunity to be paid to represent themselves and the community that they belong to, as opposed to those who do not belong to that community and thus will never fully understand that experience, being the ones to portray a character, and thus they will be reaping the benefits of this tokenization. However, it is also true that nobody is owed an explanation of anyone's personal status, especially as a queer person. Nobody needs to prove that they are queer. That is not a thing we need to do. In fact, I believe that that would undermine the very core values of the queer LGBTQI plus community, especially seeing as we approach an increasingly queer accepting world, the need for disclosure becomes smaller and less significant. We've advocated for the radical acceptance of everybody, regardless of whether we know them to be queer or not, because this is the only way to ensure that those who do come out will be accepted. And inevitably, as we become more accepting of queer people and identities and experiences, elements of queer expression and culture will become more prevalent in mainstream media. More people are becoming comfortable identifying facets of queerness within themselves, without feeling the weight of feeling like an oddity, or as if there's a definite need to define that for themselves and for the world around them. Many people no longer feel the pressure to explain themselves in detail for everyone to see. These are the things we advocate for. I know that they're things that I advocate for, and our mentality must adapt to meet our ever-adapting reality. That reality being that the line separating cisgender, allosexual, heterosexual, monogamous individuals and queer individuals has been blurred, smeared, obliterated, beyond the point of differentiation. And thus, there's no way for someone to be misleading as it comes to their sexual or gender or relationship identity, because the very nature of our community is one that allows space for personal discovery and diversity. That said, I also believe that there's a distinct difference between a straight person, say, playing a gay, bi, or ace character versus a cisgender person portraying a transgender character. As one of my commenters brought up when I posted a section of this script to my community page here on YouTube, the nature of transness makes it particularly inappropriate for cisgender actors to fill a trans role. Another example of what was deemed queerbaiting in media was in response to Billie Eilish's video Lost Cause, where she's depicted dancing, having fun with a bunch of other women. This was accompanied by an Instagram post that was like, "I love girls," and many fans were confused as to whether Billie Eilish was coming out as part of the LGBTQIA+ community, or whether that was expressing her platonic love for women. If you watch that video, it kind of just makes me think that queerbaiting, especially in the way we've come to use it, is not a very useful term in our current political atmosphere, I suppose. Because what is and isn't queer isn't defined. I'm ace and I consider myself a relationship anarchist, and I don't view things like hugging, kissing, or even sex or cohabitating as inherently romantic or sexual, depending. And I think many of us would agree that there's no real way to discern someone's gender identity, sexuality, or relationship or family values according to the way they look or behave. So when I see a video like Lost Cause, it doesn't strike me as any particular thing. However, I think it's a long-standing thing, especially in the lesbian community, where oftentimes women loving women relationships are thought to be friendships for the duration of their existence, because we tend to assume that women just tend to be affectionate towards each other as friends. Despite that being an issue in some ways on its own, I don't think that itself diminishes the need for us to just accept things as they are without denoting them as any particular thing, especially sexual or romantic. Things can exist in a weird in-between space where we don't know if they're queer or not. So just because you or me or anyone else is under the impression that someone was queer doesn't mean that that person needs to act or be a certain way. And it certainly does not mean that they should be pressured into providing details about their identity. And while I'm often the last person to criticize our modern world and current generation in favor of older convention, I do think that the entitlement regarding queerbaiting accusations, the entitlement some of us may feel to other people's or strangers' sexualities, for example, I think it reflects in part the entitlement that many of us feel to having information at our disposal always. We're fast-moving, we're well-informed even, but I think it also means that leaving well enough alone when something doesn't concern us and when we don't need to know information is more difficult. But that's just my little sub-analysis of why this might be a thing right now. Anyways, I'm going to conclude our video just by saying that, in summary, I can understand the sentiment of feeling baited as a queer person when the people who are behind the media that we consume and maybe relate to and find to be foundational to our sense of belonging in the queer community, when the people behind that aren't queer themselves, that can feel it's a little bit weird sometimes to feel like that. But I don't think that this is queer baiting per se. It's not, in the sense that it's not according to the literal definition of queerbaiting, because queerbaiting is a marketing technique and cannot be really used by an individual person just going about their individual career. It's less of a thing. And also there's no real way for celebrities especially, or actors or anyone, to lead others on about their sexuality, because oftentimes they're just trying to exist, and that is not information that is owed to anybody. Privacy does not equal deception in this case. And I think it contradicts fundamental queer community values to be on someone's case and needing to know someone's identity in order to validate their work, when we can accept people as they are without knowing, keeping in mind that they may or may not be queer, but we're all different and we exist, and it's cool. Thank you for watching this video. Leave your comments in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this. Obviously say it nicely, please. I don't want mean people in the comments. Yeah. And other than that, we'll see you next time in the space on the internet. Bye! Look at my blueberry.